The intake nurse at Willowbrook Care Center looked at me with that practiced sympathy they teach in orientation, the kind that says, "I've seen this 1,000 times before." My daughter Patricia stood behind me with her arms crossed, checking her watch for the third time in 5 minutes, while I sat in the wheelchair they insisted I use, despite walking perfectly fine into this place. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sickly, institutional glow that makes even healthy people look like they're dying. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Mrs. Edwards," the nurse said gently, "your daughter has explained that you'll be staying with us indefinitely. Is that your understanding as well?" I looked back at Patricia, searching her face for some sign that this was temporary, that she'd thought this through, that somewhere in her hurried explanation about being too busy and my recent fall, there was a plan for me to come home. But her expression was stone. Cold. Final. "Mom, we talked about this," she said without meeting my eyes. "You can't live alone anymore, not after what happened." What happened was I slipped getting out of the shower and bruised my hip. What happened was I called her crying, scared, needing comfort. What happened was instead of a hug or a cup of tea or even a conversation about safety measures, she saw an opportunity to solve what she'd apparently decided was the problem of me. "But Patricia," I whispered, "I'm fine now. The doctor said it was just a bruise. I can install grab bars, get one of those medical alert necklaces. Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is." She finally looked at me then, and what I saw in her eyes wasn't love or concern or even guilt. It was relief. Like she was dropping off a burden she'd been carrying too long. That's when I knew. This wasn't about my safety. This wasn't about my fall. This was about her convenience. And as I watched her sign the paperwork with steady hands while mine shook in my lap, I realized that my own daughter had just abandoned me to die among strangers. But what Patricia didn't know, what she'd never bothered to ask or care about, was exactly who she was abandoning. Because if she had, she might have thought twice about dropping Thelma Edwards off at a facility that I didn't just have opinions about. I owned it, along with 47 others just like it across 3 states. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who built an empire ensuring families stayed together had just been torn apart by her own. My name is Thelma Edwards, and for 73 years, I've believed that family comes first. Always. Even when it costs you everything. I suppose my story really begins 48 years ago, when my husband Robert died in a construction accident that left me a widow at 25 with a 3-year-old daughter and medical bills that seemed to multiply in the dark. Patricia was so small then, barely past her 2nd birthday, with chubby fingers that would reach for her daddy every time someone knocked on the door. She didn't understand why he never came home. I understood too well. The insurance settlement was modest, enough to bury Robert and keep us fed for maybe 6 months if I stretched every dollar until it screamed. I had my high school diploma and 2 years of community college before Robert swept me off my feet with promises of a life where I'd never have to work if I didn't want to. Funny how quickly those dreams crumble when you're standing in a cemetery, holding a child who keeps asking when daddy's coming back from his long sleep. But I wasn't the kind of woman who stayed down. My mother, God rest her soul, raised me to believe that you make your own luck, and if life knocks you down, you get up swinging. So I did what I had to do. I took a job as a night aide at Riverside Manor, the only nursing home in our small Michigan town. $12 an hour to change bedpans, feed elderly residents who'd forgotten their own names, and listen to the rattling breath of people who were waiting to die. Patricia stayed with Mrs. Henderson next door during my shifts. Sweet woman who'd raised 5 children of her own and didn't mind one more. She never asked for payment, just said, "We women have to look out for each other, don't we, dear?" I'd drop Patricia off at 7 in the evening, work until 7 in the morning, then stumble home to make breakfast and play blocks until I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. Those were the hardest years of my life, but also the most important. Because working in that nursing home, I saw things that broke my heart and opened my eyes. Families who dumped their elderly parents and never visited. Children who fought over inheritance while their mothers lay dying alone. Patients who'd cry themselves to sleep because no one remembered their birthdays anymore. But I also saw the flip side. The facilities that treated residents like livestock, cutting corners on care to maximize profits. Understaffed shifts where one aide was responsible for 30 patients. Medication errors that went unreported. Food that wouldn't be fit for dogs, let alone human beings who'd lived full, rich lives and deserved dignity in their final chapters. It was Mrs. Dorothy Jameson who changed everything for me. She was 84, sharp as a tack mentally, but frail physically after a stroke left her partially paralyzed. Her son lived in California and called maybe once a month. Her daughter lived 20 minutes away but was too busy to visit more than Christmas and Easter. Mrs. Jameson had been a nurse herself, back when nurses wore white caps and carried pocket watches. She'd delivered babies, held the hands of dying soldiers, raised 3 children while working night shifts at the county hospital. And she was dying alone, forgotten, in a place that saw her as a monthly check rather than a human being. One night, during one of those quiet conversations that happen in nursing homes after midnight, when the world feels suspended between day and tomorrow, Mrs. Jameson grabbed my hand with her good one and said, "Thelma, dear, you have something special. You see people. Really see them. Don't waste that gift." "What do you mean?" I asked, adjusting her blanket and checking her water glass. "I mean," she said, her voice growing softer, "there's a better way to do this. To care for people like me. Someone just has to be brave enough to try." Mrs. Jameson died 2 weeks later on a Tuesday morning while I was home sleeping. Her son didn't make it to the funeral. Her daughter showed up late and left early. I was one of 4 people who stood by her grave and said goodbye to a woman who'd spent her life caring for others. That night, I made a decision that would shape the rest of my life. I was going to build something better. Not just for Mrs. Jameson, who was beyond help, but for all the Mrs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jamesons who were still out there, still breathing, still hoping someone would remember they mattered. I started small. I enrolled in business classes at the community college, taking morning courses while Patricia was in preschool and before my night shifts. I studied healthcare administration, finance, operations management. I learned about licensing requirements, state regulations, insurance reimbursements. I read everything I could get my hands on about the nursing home industry, both the good and the catastrophic. Patricia was 5 when I graduated with my associate degree. She came to the ceremony wearing a pink dress I'd sewn myself and a smile that could have powered the whole auditorium. When they called my name and I walked across that stage, I heard her little voice calling out, "That's my mommy!" above all the polite applause. I kept working nights at Riverside Manor, but now I was watching everything with different eyes. I documented the problems, the inefficiencies, the small cruelties that happened when people stopped seeing residents as individuals. I saved every penny I could, living on pasta and hope, putting aside money for a dream that seemed impossible but felt inevitable. The breakthrough came when I was 28. The owner of Riverside Manor, Mr. Hutchinson, had a heart attack, and his family decided to sell rather than deal with the headache of running a care facility. The asking price was $250,000, which might as well have been $2 million for all the chance I had of getting a loan. But I'd learned something during those years of night shifts and business classes. Sometimes the most important conversations happen when you're not trying to have them. I'd been caring for Mr. Hutchinson's mother-in-law, Eleanor, for 3 years. She was 91, wheelchair-bound, but still sharp enough to balance her own checkbook and tell stories about the Great Depression that would make you grateful for every sandwich you'd ever taken for granted. Eleanor had watched me work. She'd seen how I stayed late to read to residents who couldn't sleep, how I remembered everyone's preferences for how they liked their coffee or which soap opera they followed. She'd noticed that the other staff members came to me when they had problems, that families requested me specifically for their loved ones. "Thelma," she said one evening while I was helping her with her evening medications, "what would you do if you owned this place?" I could have given her the polite answer, the safe answer. Instead, I told her the truth. I told her about the changes I'd make, the dignity I'd restore, the way care could be both profitable and humane if someone just cared enough to try. I told her about my vision of facilities that felt like homes instead of warehouses, where families wanted to visit, instead of making excuses to stay away. 3 weeks later, Eleanor Hutchinson handed me a check for the full purchase price of Riverside Manor. No interest, no payment plan, just a handwritten note that said, "Make it beautiful, dear. Make it a place where I'd want to live." Patricia was 7 when I became a nursing home owner. She didn't understand what it meant, just that Mommy was busier now, that we moved into a bigger apartment, and that she got to spend more afternoons at the nursing home doing homework in my office while I worked. She'd wander the halls, chatting, with residents who lit up when they saw her coming. She became everyone's honorary granddaughter, collecting hugs and candy and stories about the old days. I thought I was building something for other people. I didn't realize I was building Patricia's inheritance. I didn't know that every late night I spent balancing budgets and fighting insurance companies and holding the hands of dying strangers was an investment in her future. I just knew that I wanted to create something that mattered, something that honored people like Mrs. Jameson and Eleanor. The first year was brutal. I worked 18-hour days, learning on the fly how to manage staff, negotiate with vendors, navigate the maze of state inspections and federal regulations. I slept in my office more nights than I slept at home. Patricia ate more dinners with the nursing home cook than with me. But slowly, things began to change. Riverside Manor went from a place families apologized for to a place they bragged about. We had waiting lists. We won state awards for quality of care. Families started planning birthday parties and anniversary celebrations in our common areas because their loved ones were happy there, thriving there. I used the profits to buy a second facility, then a third. Patricia grew up thinking it was normal for your mother to own nursing homes, the way other people owned restaurants or dry cleaners. She'd come to board meetings, sitting quietly in the corner with her coloring books while I negotiated contracts and reviewed financial statements. By the time Patricia graduated high school, Edwards Healthcare Group owned 12 facilities across Michigan and Ohio. By the time she graduated college, with a degree in marketing that I'd paid for without her ever having to take a student loan, we owned 23. When she got married to David Chen, a nice boy from a good family who treated her like she hung the moon, we celebrated at the Ritz-Carlton in Detroit because I could afford it. I gave Patricia everything I'd never had: private schools, music, lessons, summer camps, cars that started every time, clothes that came from department stores instead of thrift shops. When she wanted to study abroad in college, I wired the money without question. When she and David wanted to buy their first house, I helped with the down payment. When they struggled with fertility treatments, I paid for the best specialists money could buy. I thought I was giving her security. I thought I was showing her love. I thought that by making sure she never had to struggle the way I had, I was being a good mother. I never realized that by removing every obstacle from her path, I might have also removed her capacity for gratitude. I never considered that a child who never has to sacrifice for anything might grow into an adult who doesn't understand the value of sacrifice. When Patricia's son Michael was born after years of trying, I was in the delivery room holding her hand while she pushed. When he took his first breath and let out that perfect, angry cry that meant he was alive and healthy, I cried harder than his parents did. I'd waited 41 years to become a grandmother, and it felt like everything I'd built, everything I'd worked for, had led to this moment. Michael became the center of my universe in a way that surprised even me. I'd loved Patricia desperately, the way you love someone you're responsible for keeping alive. But loving Michael was different. It was pure joy, uncomplicated by worry or obligation. When Patricia went back to work after maternity leave, I was the one who watched him 3 days a week. I was the one who taught him to walk in the hallways of my corporate offices, who read him stories in boardrooms, who spoiled him with toys and attention and the kind of unconditional love that grandmothers are famous for. I cut back on my expansion, plans to spend more time with him. I delegated more responsibility to my management team so I could attend his school plays and soccer games. When Patricia and David talked about wanting to buy a bigger house in a better school district, I bought it for them. When they mentioned that the property taxes were higher than they'd budgeted for, I took care of those too. I thought we were a family. I thought that everything I'd built was building something for all of us, a legacy that would keep us connected across generations. I thought that the love I poured into Patricia and Michael would somehow circle back, that the security I provided would create the kind of gratitude that deepens bonds instead of loosening them. But somewhere along the way, my generosity became their expectation. My sacrifices became their rights. The woman who'd built an empire to ensure families could stay together was slowly, quietly, being written out of her own family's story. It started small, the way these things always do. Patricia stopped asking if she could borrow money and started assuming it would be there. The thank you calls after I'd covered another expense grew shorter, then less frequent, then disappeared altogether. Michael, who'd once run to me with every scraped knee and exciting discovery, began to see me as a source of toys and treats rather than a person worthy of attention when there was nothing to be gained. I told myself it was normal. Children grow up, families evolve, relationships change. I told myself that providing for them was its own reward, that seeing them thrive was all the gratitude I needed. I told myself a lot of things that weren't true because the truth was too painful to accept. I was becoming irrelevant to the people I'd made my whole life about. The nursing home empire I'd built in the name of keeping families together was about to become the stage for my own family's ultimate betrayal. And the woman who'd spent her life ensuring that elderly people were treated with dignity was about to discover just how quickly dignity can disappear when you're no longer useful to the people you love most. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so devastating. I'd spent decades fighting to create places where families wanted to visit their elderly relatives, and I was about to become an elderly relative that my own family couldn't wait to get rid of. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because Thelma Edwards hadn't built a healthcare empire by being weak, passive, or easily dismissed. And if my own daughter thought she could abandon me like I was just another inconvenient old woman, she was about to learn exactly what kind of woman she'd underestimated. The story of my downfall was about to become the story of their reckoning, and it would all begin with a simple fall in a shower that would change everything. The first sign that something was shifting came on a Tuesday in October, the kind of crisp fall day that makes you grateful to be alive. I had driven to Patricia's house to drop off Michael's Halloween costume, the elaborate pirate outfit I'd commissioned from a seamstress who specialized in theatrical costumes. The attention to detail was exquisite, from the hand-stitched vest to the tiny leather boots that had cost more than most people spend on their children's entire Halloween wardrobe. I knocked on the front door, balancing the garment bag and a small bag of the sugar cookies Michael loved, the ones shaped like pumpkins with orange frosting that took me 3 hours to decorate perfectly. Patricia answered wearing yoga clothes, and an expression I'd never seen before, somewhere between annoyance and exhaustion. "Oh," she said, not moving aside to let me in. "Mom, I thought you were going to call first." I paused, the garment bag suddenly feeling heavier in my arms. "I did call. Yesterday. You said any time after 2 would be fine. Did I? She looked genuinely confused, then glanced at her phone. I'm sorry, I completely forgot. David's mother is coming over in an hour to help plan Michael's birthday party, and I haven't even showered yet. David's mother, Elena Chen, a lovely woman who'd retired early from her job as a bank executive and spent her days volunteering at the animal shelter and taking pottery classes. A woman who had time for spontaneous visits and birthday planning because she hadn't spent the last 40 years building a business empire to secure her family's future. I can just leave these and go, I said, holding up the costume bag. I know you're busy. Actually, that would be great. Patricia took the bag without looking inside it, without asking about the details I'd obsessed over, without the excitement I'd expected when she saw how perfect it was. Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver. I stood there for a moment, waiting for her to invite me in for just a few minutes, waiting for her to ask if I wanted to see Michael, waiting for some sign that my presence was wanted rather than just tolerated. Instead, she was already stepping back, already closing the door, already moving on to whatever was more important than the woman who'd just spent 2 weeks coordinating the perfect costume for her grandson. Tell Michael I said hello, I said to the closing door. Will do, came her muffled reply from the other side. I walked back to my car slowly, telling myself it was fine, that she really was busy, that I was being too sensitive. But something felt different. Cold. Like I'd just been processed rather than visited. The feeling grew stronger over the following weeks. Phone calls that used to happen naturally began to feel forced, scheduled around Patricia's convenience rather than our mutual desire to connect. When I'd call to check in, her responses became shorter, more distracted. She'd put me on speaker while she did other things, and I could hear her typing on her computer or unloading the dishwasher while I tried to tell her about my day. The shift was so gradual that I questioned whether I was imagining it. Maybe this was just what happened when children grew up, when they built their own lives and families. Maybe I was being needy, clingy, the kind of mother who couldn't let go. I'd always prided myself on giving Patricia space to become her own person, on not being one of those mothers who called every day demanding attention. But space, I was. Learning could become distance without you noticing, and distance could become indifference if you weren't careful. Michael's 8th birthday party was the next wake-up call. I'd offered to host it at my house, which had a large backyard and a pool that Michael loved. I'd envisioned an elaborate pirate theme to match the Halloween costume, with treasure hunts and games and a cake shaped like a ship. But Patricia declined, saying they'd already booked the community center near their house. It's just easier, she explained over the phone. All his friends live in our neighborhood, and their parents can just drop them off without having to drive across town. Across town. As if my house was in another state rather than 20 minutes away. As if convenience was more important than giving Michael the kind of magical birthday that grandmothers are supposed to provide. Of course, I said, swallowing my disappointment. Whatever works best for you. Can I at least contribute something? The cake, maybe? Or decorations? Actually, we've got it covered. Elena found this amazing party planner who does everything themed. She's handling all the details. Elena again. Elena, who got to be the helpful grandmother while I was relegated. To guest status at my own grandson's birthday party, I showed up with an expensive gift. A remote-controlled robot that I'd researched for weeks to make sure it was exactly what an 8-year-old boy would love. Michael opened it in a pile of other presents, said a quick thank you, and immediately moved on to the next box. I watched him play with a simple soccer ball that Elena had brought, kicking it around the community center while my sophisticated robot sat forgotten on the gift table. The party was lovely, professional, polished, perfect in every way that mattered to everyone except me. I sat at a table with other parents I didn't know, making small talk about schools and sports teams while my daughter laughed and chatted with Elena about shared friends and neighborhood gossip. I felt like an outsider at my own grandson's celebration, a well-meaning stranger who'd brought a nice gift but didn't quite belong. When it was time to cut the cake, a beautiful store-bought creation decorated with soccer balls and footballs, Michael blew out his candles and made a wish. Elena was standing right beside him, her hand on his shoulder, beaming like the proud grandmother she was. I was 3 feet away, taking pictures with my phone, documenting a moment I should have been part of creating. As the party wound down and parents collected their children, I helped clean up, stacking chairs and throwing away paper plates. Patricia was busy saying goodbye to guests, thanking them for coming, making plans for future playdates. Elena was boxing up leftover cake and organizing the presents, moving through the space like she belonged there. I finished wiping down a table and went to find Patricia to say goodbye. She was by the door, hugging Elena goodbye, thanking her for all her help with the planning. "Mom, thanks for coming," Patricia said when she saw me, giving me the same polite hug she'd given the other parents. "Michael loved your gift." "Did he?" I asked, glancing over at my grandson who was playing with that soccer ball again. He seemed more interested in other things. Patricia followed my gaze and laughed. "You know how kids are. Sometimes the simplest things make them happiest. Simple things, like a $10 soccer ball instead of a $150 robot that I'd chosen specifically because I'd heard him talking about wanting to learn about robotics. Simple things brought by the grandmother who understood him better than the one who'd helped raise him. I drove home feeling hollow, like I'd attended a stranger's child's birthday party instead of my own grandson's. The house felt too quiet when I walked in, too big for just one person, too empty of the family sounds I'd expected to fill it at this stage of my life. That night, I called my sister Ruth in Florida. Ruth was 5 years older than me, widowed like I was, but she'd never remarried or had children. She'd spent her career as a traveling nurse, seeing the country, having adventures, living for herself in ways I'd never allowed myself to do. "Ruthie," I said when she answered, "do you ever regret not having children?" She was quiet for a moment. Ruth had always been the more direct one between us, the one who said things other people were too polite to voice. "Thelma, honey, what's going on? That's not a question you ask unless something's wrong." I told her about the birthday party, about the gradual changes I'd been noticing, about the feeling that I was becoming irrelevant in my own family's life. I tried to keep my voice steady, professional, the way I spoke in board meetings when discussing difficult decisions. But by the end, I was crying. "Oh, sweetheart," Ruth said softly. "I've been wondering when you'd notice." "Notice what?" "That they've been taking you for granted for years. Every time I visit, every time we talk, it's the same thing. Patricia needs this. Michael wants that. You're paying for this. You're handling that. When's the last time one of them did something for you? When's the last time they asked how you were feeling, what you needed, what you wanted?" I opened my mouth to defend them, to list all the ways they showed they cared. But the words wouldn't come. Because when I really thought about it, when I stripped away my own need to believe, we were close, Ruth was right. The relationship had become entirely one-directional. I gave, they took, and somewhere along the way, we'd all started thinking that was normal. "But I don't want them to feel obligated," I said weakly. "I don't want to be a burden." "There's a difference between being a burden and being valued," Ruth replied. "You've spent so much time making sure they never had to sacrifice for you that they've forgotten you're a person who deserves consideration. You've trained them to see you as a resource instead of a relationship." Her words stung because they rang true. I had trained them. Every time Patricia had a financial problem, I'd solved it before she had to struggle. Every time Michael wanted something expensive, I'd provided it before they had to save up or tell him no. Every time they'd been thoughtless or ungrateful, I'd made excuses for them rather than addressing it. I'd been so afraid of being the kind of demanding mother I'd seen other women become that I'd swung too far in the opposite direction. I'd become invisible, taken for granted, expected to provide without ever expecting anything in return. The pattern became more obvious once Ruth had named it. Patricia's calls became even less frequent, and when they did come, they usually involved a request of some kind. The property taxes on their house were higher than expected. Michael needed new equipment for baseball season. David's car needed expensive repairs. Each conversation felt more like a transaction than a connection. I found myself analyzing every interaction, looking for signs of genuine affection versus simple utility. When Patricia invited me to Michael's school play, was it because she wanted me there, or because she needed someone to bring refreshments for the cast party? When she suggested we go shopping together, was it because she missed spending time with me, or because she'd seen something expensive she wanted and knew I'd end up paying for it? The doubt was poisonous, making me question every relationship I'd built, every memory I'd cherished. Had Patricia ever loved me for who I was, or only for what I could provide? Had Michael's childhood affection been genuine, or had I simply been the source of toys and treats that made me worth his attention? Christmas that year was particularly painful. I'd spent weeks planning the perfect gifts, as I always did. For Patricia, a spa weekend at a luxury resort she'd mentioned wanting to visit. For David, a set of professional-grade golf clubs to replace the old ones he'd been complaining about. For Michael, the latest gaming system plus every accessory and game he'd mentioned wanting. They opened their gifts with enthusiasm, expressing gratitude that felt genuine in the moment. But within hours, I noticed Patricia researching dates for the spa weekend. David was already online ordering additional golf accessories I hadn't thought to include, and Michael was absorbed in his new games, barely acknowledging my presence, unless he needed help setting something up. I'd given them everything they wanted, and somehow that had made me invisible rather than appreciated. Elena, meanwhile, had given Patricia a homemade photo album filled with pictures from Michael's soccer season, complete with handwritten captions and stories about each game. She'd given David a book about wine tasting, something that showed she'd paid attention to his developing interest in viticulture. For Michael, she'd created a scavenger hunt that led to a modest gift, a personalized baseball glove with his name embossed on it. Her gifts had cost a fraction of what I'd spent, but they generated more genuine excitement, more conversation, more connection. She'd given thought and attention where I'd given money and convenience. She'd created experiences where I'd purchased objects. I sat in my big, empty house that night, surrounded by the remnants of wrapping paper and the echo of thank yous that had felt more obligatory than heartfelt. I'd spent thousands of dollars trying to buy joy, trying to purchase relevance, trying to ensure my place in their lives through generosity. But generosity without boundaries, I was beginning to realize, could become its own form of manipulation, even when that wasn't the intention. I was trying to love them into loving me back, and it wasn't working. The real wake-up call came in February, during one of Michigan's brutal winter storms. I'd been battling a persistent cough for weeks, something that wouldn't go away despite rest and over-the-counter medication. When it developed into what felt like pneumonia, with fever and chest pain that made it hard to breathe, I finally admitted I needed medical attention. I called Patricia from the emergency room, where I'd driven myself despite feeling weak and dizzy. The nurse had insisted I come in immediately after describing my symptoms over the phone. I was scared, more scared than I'd been since the early days after Robert's death, when everything felt uncertain and dangerous. "Patricia," I said when she answered, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "I'm at the hospital. I think I have pneumonia, and they want to admit me for observation." "Oh no," she said, and I could hear genuine concern in her voice. "Which hospital? Do you need me to come?" Relief flooded through me. Of course she'd come. Of course she'd be there when I really needed her. This was my daughter, the child I'd raised, the woman I'd sacrificed everything for. Whatever distance had grown between us, she'd still be there when it mattered. "St. Mary's," I said. "But you don't have to. Come right now. I just wanted you to know where I was, in case—" "Actually, Mom, tonight's really complicated. Michael has his school science fair, and we've been working on his project for weeks. David's working late, so I can't really leave him. But I'll come first thing in the morning, okay? Unless it's really serious." I sat there in the emergency room bed, IV in my arm, oxygen monitor beeping, feeling sicker than I'd felt in years, and listened to my daughter prioritize a school science fair over my hospitalization. "It's okay," I heard myself say. "I understand. The science fair is important. Thank you for understanding. You're the best, Mom. I'll see you tomorrow, and I'll bring Michael to visit after school if you're feeling up to it." She hung up, and I stared at the phone in my hand, wondering when exactly I'd become the kind of person whose medical emergency could be scheduled around more convenient family obligations. The nurse came in to check my vitals and saw the expression on my face. "Everything all right, honey?" she asked kindly. "My daughter can't come tonight," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "She has a prior commitment." The nurse paused in checking my blood pressure, her expression shifting to something that looked like pity. "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anyone else we can call for you?" I almost laughed. Anyone else? As if I'd built a life full of people who cared about me instead of spending 40 years focused entirely on a family that apparently had more important things to do than sit with me while I fought pneumonia alone. "No," I said quietly. "There's no one else." I spent 3 days in the hospital. Patricia did visit the next morning, bringing flowers and apologies and explanations about how crazy their schedule had been. She stayed for an hour, making small talk and checking her phone periodically, before saying she needed to pick up Michael from school. Elena Chen came that afternoon. Elena, who barely knew me, who had no obligation to care about my health or well-being. She brought homemade soup and sat with me for 2 hours, not because she had to, but because she'd heard from Patricia that I was alone and thought no one should recover from pneumonia without company. "This is so kind of you," I said, genuinely touched by her presence. "Nonsense," Elena replied, adjusting my blanket and making sure my water glass was full. "We're family, aren't we? Michael's grandmothers should look out for each other." Family. This woman who'd known Michael for 3 years considered us family and acted accordingly. My daughter, who I'd raised and sacrificed for and loved unconditionally, had prioritized a science fair over my hospitalization. The contrast was stark and painful and impossible to ignore. When I was discharged, Patricia offered to drive me home and stay for a few hours to make sure I was settled. I appreciated the gesture, but I couldn't help noticing that she seemed eager to leave, checking the time and mentioning plans she had later. When she finally did go, the house felt quieter than ever. That evening, Elena called to check on me. Not Patricia, who knew I'd just come home from the hospital and might need something. Elena, who had no reason to think about me except basic human decency. "How are you feeling, dear?" she asked. "Do you need anything from the store? I'm going out anyway, so it's no trouble." I almost cried. Such a simple offer, such basic consideration, and it meant more to me than all the expensive gifts I'd bought for others combined. "I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "But thank you for asking. Thank you for caring." "Of course I care," Elena said, sounding genuinely surprised that I'd thank her for something so basic. "Take care of yourself. Thelma. Call if you need anything." After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen and faced a truth I'd been avoiding for months. The family I'd built my entire life around was slowly, quietly, systematically excluding me from their daily existence. Not maliciously, not intentionally, but inevitably. I'd become the person they called when they needed something, and the person they forgot when they didn't. I'd spent decades ensuring they never had to need me in any way that mattered, and, as a result, they'd learned not to see me as mattering at all. The woman who'd built an empire to keep families together was losing her own family to the very success she'd achieved. And the worst part was, I'd trained them to see my absence as normal, my presence as optional, my love as a given rather than a gift. But Thelma Edwards hadn't survived widowhood, built a business empire, and climbed out of poverty by accepting defeat when things got difficult. I'd just been too generous, too accommodating, too willing to settle for gratitude instead of demanding respect. If my family had forgotten who I was, perhaps it was time to remind them. And if they'd grown comfortable treating me like an obligation rather than a blessing, maybe it was time to show them what their lives would look like without me in them. The shift was coming, whether they realized it or not. But first, I had to finish learning just how far the disrespect had spread, how deep the taking for granted had become. Because before you can fix a problem, you have to understand exactly how broken things really are. And I was beginning to suspect that what I'd discovered so far was just the tip of the iceberg. The phone call that changed everything came on, a Thursday morning in March, while I was reviewing quarterly reports from our newest facility in Toledo. The sun was streaming through my office windows, and I was actually having a good day, pleased with the occupancy rates and the positive feedback we'd received from the latest state inspection. My assistant knocked and told me Patricia was on. Line 1, which surprised me since we'd spoken just 2 days earlier when she'd called to ask if I could cover Michael's summer camp fees. "Hi, honey," I said, expecting the usual request or update about Michael's activities. "What's going on?" "Mom, we need to talk." Her tone was different, more serious than I'd heard in months. "Can you come over this evening, after Michael goes to bed?" My heart jumped a little. Serious conversations in our family were rare, and they usually involved either major life changes or problems that couldn't be solved with a simple check. "Of course, is everything all right? Are you and David okay?" "We're fine," she said quickly. "It's not about us, exactly. It's about you." About me. I spent the rest of the day distracted, running through possibilities. Maybe they'd noticed I'd been pulling back slightly, being less available for last-minute requests. Maybe they wanted to plan something special for my upcoming 74th birthday. Maybe Patricia had finally realized how one-sided our relationship had become and wanted to address it. I arrived at their house at 8:30, bringing a bottle of wine and wearing the soft blue sweater Patricia had once said brought out my eyes. David answered the door with a smile that seemed forced, giving me a hug that felt more awkward than usual. "Thelma, good to see you," he said, but he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Patricia's in the living room. Can I get you anything to drink?" "Just water, thank you." I followed him through their beautifully decorated house, the house I'd helped them buy, filled with furniture I'd helped them afford, and found Patricia sitting on the edge of their white sofa looking nervous. She gestured for me to sit across from her in the chair that I'd always thought of as my chair during family gatherings. The coffee table between us felt like a barrier, and I noticed she'd positioned herself at the far end of the sofa, maximizing the distance between us. "Mom," she began, then stopped, looking at David as if seeking support. He nodded encouragingly and sat down beside her, their unity suddenly feeling like opposition. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked gently, though something cold was beginning to form in my stomach. "We've been talking, David and I, and we're worried about you." She folded her hands in her lap, the gesture reminding me suddenly of how she used to sit when she was a child about to confess to breaking something. "About your living situation, your safety, your future." "My safety?" I repeated, genuinely confused. "What do you mean?" "Mom, you fell in the shower last month. You could have been seriously hurt, and no one would have known for hours, maybe days." Her voice was taking on that patient tone people use when they're about to tell you something they think you won't want to hear. "You're living alone in that big house. and you're not getting any younger. I felt the first flicker of alarm. Patricia, I told you, that was a minor slip. I was tired, I got a little dizzy, and I caught myself. There was no serious injury, no real danger. This time, David interjected, and I noticed he was avoiding eye contact too. But what about next time? What if you fall and hit your head? What if you have a medical emergency and can't get to the phone? I could say the same thing about anyone our age, I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. Accidents happen. That doesn't mean I'm incapable of living independently. Patricia leaned forward slightly, her expression shifting into what I recognized as her problem-solving mode, the same look she'd worn as a child when she was determined to convince me of something. We've been doing some research, and there are some really wonderful senior living communities nearby. Places where you'd have your own apartment, but also have help available if you need it. Social activities, meal plans, transportation services. The cold in my stomach was spreading upward, freezing my chest, making it hard to breathe properly. Senior living communities. You mean retirement homes? Not retirement homes, David said quickly. Independent living facilities. Much more like apartments than institutions. We actually visited a few, and they're really quite nice. They'd visited facilities, without me. They'd been planning my future, discussing my life, making decisions about where I should live. And this conversation was their way of informing me rather than including me. You visited places for me to live without telling me. I said it as a statement, not a question, letting the reality of their presumptions settle in the air between us. We wanted to have options to present to you, Patricia said, and I could hear the defensiveness creeping into her voice. We thought it would be easier if we could show you some positive possibilities rather than just talking about problems. What problems? I asked, and my voice was sharper than I'd intended. What specific problems am I having that require me to give up my home and move into a facility? They exchanged another look, and I realized they'd rehearsed this conversation. They'd planned what to say, how to handle my objections, how to guide me toward the conclusion they'd already reached. Mom, you're 73 years old, Patricia said gently. You've had some health issues lately, the pneumonia, some dizzy spells. You're driving less at night. You've mentioned forgetting things occasionally. Everyone forgets things occasionally, and I've recovered completely from the pneumonia. As for driving less at night, that's called being responsible, not being incapacitated. We're not saying you're incapacitated, David said, though his tone suggested that's exactly what they were implying. We're saying that it might be smart to make this transition while you're still healthy enough to enjoy it, rather than waiting until there's a crisis. A transition. They were talking about dismantling my life, selling my home, moving me into institutional care, and they were calling it a transition, as if it were a natural progression rather than an abandonment. Have you considered, I said slowly, that if you're so concerned about my safety and well-being, you could simply be more involved in my life? Check on me more often. Include me in your daily routines. Make sure I'm not isolated. Another exchanged glance, this one tinged with what looked like guilt. Mom, we do check on you, Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. We call. We visit. You call when you need something, and you visit when it's convenient. The words came out, harsher than I'd intended, but I was past the point of protecting their feelings. When I was in the hospital with pneumonia, you came for an hour between Michael's school pickup and your dinner plans. That's not fair, Patricia said, her cheeks flushing. We have responsibilities, obligations. Michael has activities. David has work. I have commitments. And I don't? I asked. I don't have a business to run, facilities to oversee, employees who depend on me? I should just set all of that aside and move into a senior community so you can feel better about your minimal involvement in my life? Mom, running the business at your age is another concern we have, David said, And there it was, the real heart of the matter. It's a lot of stress, a lot of responsibility. Maybe it's time to consider selling, or at least stepping back. Selling. My life's work, my legacy, the empire I'd built from nothing with my own hands and determination. They wanted me to sell it so I could sit in some facility playing bingo and waiting to die while they went on with their lives, unburdened by the inconvenience of an aging mother who might need something from them. I see, I said quietly, and suddenly everything was crystal clear. This isn't about my safety or my well-being. This is about your convenience. You want me tucked away somewhere where you don't have to worry about me, where someone else is responsible for my care, where you can visit on holidays and feel good about yourselves without actually having to be involved. That's not true, Patricia protested, but she was looking down at her hands again, and I could see the truth in her posture. Isn't it? When's the last time you called just to see how I was feeling? When's the last time you invited me to do something with you that didn't involve me paying for it or providing something you needed? When's the last time you acted like you actually enjoyed my company rather than just tolerated it? The silence stretched between us, filled with uncomfortable truths that none of us wanted to acknowledge. Finally, Patricia looked up, and I saw tears in her eyes, though whether they were from guilt or frustration, I couldn't tell. Mom, I love you. We love you. But you have to understand, we have our own lives to live, our own family to take care of. We can't be responsible for managing your life on top of everything else. And there it was, the brutal honesty I'd been both dreading and needing to hear. I wasn't their family, not really. I was a responsibility, a burden, something to be managed rather than someone to be loved. I never asked you to manage my life, I said softly. I've been managing quite well on my own for 47 years. What I asked for was to be part of your life, to matter to you, to be treated like family rather than like an obligation. You are family, David said. But he seemed to realize how hollow the words sounded. No, I replied, standing up from the chair that was apparently not my chair after all. Family doesn't research where to put each other without consultation. Family doesn't plan each other's futures in secret meetings. Family doesn't treat each other like problems to be solved. Patricia stood too, reaching toward me as if to stop me from leaving. Mom, please don't go. We can talk about this. We can figure something out that works for everyone. Something that works for everyone. I picked up my purse, the same purse I'd carried for 3 years, the one Patricia had never complimented despite its being expensive and elegant. You've already figured out what works for you, Patricia. You want me in a facility where other people will deal with my needs so you don't have to. You want me to sell my business so you don't have to worry about my stress levels. You want me to become someone else's responsibility so you can live your life without the inconvenience of an aging mother. That's not what we want, she said, but her voice was weak, unconvincing. Then what do you want? I asked. Do you want me to move in with you? Do you want to have dinner together twice a week? Do you want to include me in your Sunday plans, your vacation discussions, your daily life? Because if that's what you want, I'm here. I've always been here. But if what you want is to put me somewhere safe and convenient while you pretend you're being loving and responsible, then we have nothing more to discuss. I walked toward the door, and neither of them followed me. David called out something about thinking it over, about not making any hasty decisions. But I was already leaving, already walking away from the family I'd thought I was part of. In the driveway, I sat in my car for several minutes, my hands shaking as I tried to process what had just happened. My daughter and son-in-law had spent time and energy researching places to put me away. They'd visited facilities, made comparisons, developed plans for my life that didn't include consulting me until they were ready to present me with their conclusions. They saw me as a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be loved. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and tears. I refused to let fall completely. I'd cried enough over this family, sacrificed enough, given enough. If they wanted to treat me like a burden, perhaps it was time to stop carrying the weight of their expectations, their needs, their comfortable assumption that I would always be there to provide whatever they required. When I got home, I walked through my house with new eyes. It was a beautiful house, spacious and elegant, filled with antiques I'd carefully chosen and art I'd commissioned from local artists. It was the home of a successful woman, a business owner, a person of substance and achievement. It was not the home of someone who needed to be managed or relocated for her own good. I poured myself a glass of wine, the good wine I usually saved, for special occasions, and sat in my living room looking out at the garden I'd designed and maintained for 15 years. Tomorrow, I would have to decide what to do with this new information about how my family saw me, how they planned to handle the inconvenience of my aging. But tonight, I was going to sit in my beautiful home and remember who I was before I became someone's mother, someone's burden, someone's problem to solve. I was Thelma Edwards, and I'd built an empire from nothing. I'd survived loss, overcome obstacles, created jobs for hundreds of people and homes for thousands of elderly residents who needed care and dignity. I was not someone who needed to be put away for her own good. And if my family had forgotten that, perhaps it was time to remind them exactly who they were dealing with. The conversation had revealed the truth I'd been avoiding for months. They didn't want me in their lives in any meaningful way. They wanted me safely contained, properly cared for by professionals, conveniently located for occasional visits that would salve their consciences without requiring any real commitment or sacrifice. They wanted all the benefits of having a loving mother and grandmother without any of the actual work of loving her back. 3 days later, I received a folder in the mail from Patricia. No note, no explanation, just a collection of brochures for senior living facilities with information packets and price lists. Sunset Manor, Golden Years Community, Peaceful Meadows Retirement Village, each one promising independence and security, social activities and professional care. Each one representing their solution to the problem of me. I looked through them carefully, reading the descriptions of amenities and services, studying the photos of happy seniors playing cards and tending gardens and participating in group exercises. They were lovely facilities, and I'm sure many people found genuine happiness and community there. But they weren't chosen for me by people who loved me and wanted what was best for me. They were chosen for me by people who wanted me out of the way, safely managed by someone else, no longer their responsibility or concern. That evening, Michael called me, which was unusual. He was 11 now, old enough to have his own phone and his own busy social life that rarely included conversations with his grandmother. "Hi, Grandma Thelma," he said, and I could hear the discomfort in his young voice. "Mom said I should call you." Mom said he should call. Not that he'd wanted to, not that he'd missed talking to me, but that he'd been instructed to check in with the grandmother who was apparently causing family stress. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice warm despite the pain his words had caused. "How was school today?" "It was okay. We're working on this project about family history, and I have to interview older relatives." He paused, and I could almost hear him working up to whatever his mother had told him to say. "Mom thought maybe you could help me with it." "I'd be happy to help," I said, and for a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe this was an opportunity to connect with him, to share stories about his grandfather he'd never met, about the early days when Patricia was young, about the family history that connected us all. Cool. So I need to know about, old stuff. What was it like when you were a kid? What jobs people had, that kind of thing? Old stuff. I was old stuff now. A source of historical information rather than a living person with current thoughts and feelings and experiences worth sharing. "Of course," I said. "Would you like to come over this weekend? We could look through some photo albums, and I could tell you stories about your grandfather and your mother when she was little." "Actually, could you maybe just email me the information? I'm pretty busy this weekend with baseball and stuff. Email him the information. Reduce our family history, our connection, my memories and experiences to a convenient digital transmission that he could copy and paste into his school project. Without having to spend time with me or hear the stories behind the facts. Sure, I heard myself say. I'll put together some information for you. Thanks, Grandma. You're the best. The best. At providing what was needed without requiring anything inconvenient in return. After he hung up, I sat with the phone in my lap and faced the final devastating truth. It wasn't just Patricia and David who saw me as a burden. Michael, the grandson I'd adored and spoiled and prioritized above my own needs, saw me the same way. I was useful for school projects and birthday money, but not worth spending time with, not interesting enough to visit, not important enough to prioritize. I'd raised a daughter who saw me as a problem to be solved, and she'd raised a son who saw me as a resource to be utilized. 3 generations of taking me for granted, of expecting me to give without receiving, of treating my love as an entitlement rather than a gift. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the brochures, about the conversation with Patricia, and David, about Michael's casual dismissal of any real connection between us. I thought about Elena Chen, who'd shown me more genuine care during my hospital stay than my own family had. I thought about all the years of sacrificing, giving, hoping, believing that love was its own reward. But love without respect isn't really love at all. It's just habit, convenience, exploitation dressed up in prettier language. By morning, I'd made a decision. If my family wanted to treat me like a burden that needed professional management, perhaps it was time to give them exactly what they were asking for. But not in the way they expected, because Thelma Edwards had spent her entire life making sure elderly people were treated with dignity and respect in their final years. I knew exactly what good care looked like, what family involvement should entail, what love in action actually meant, and I was about to give my family a masterclass in the difference between caring about someone and caring for them. They'd asked me to consider moving into a facility where professionals could manage my needs. I was about to show them what it felt like when someone they loved became just another client, just another resident, just another elderly person whose family dropped them off and walked away. But first, I had a phone call to make to my attorney. Because if Patricia wanted me in a nursing home, I was going to make sure it was exactly the nursing home I chose. And I was going to make sure that every decision about my care, my visitors, my daily life, was mine to make. They wanted me managed by professionals. They were about to learn that I was the professional who did the managing. The irony was about to become delicious. The morning after my revelation, I woke up at 5:30 with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. No confusion, no self-doubt, no desperate hope that maybe I'd misunderstood Patricia's intentions. Just crystal clear understanding of exactly what needed to happen next and exactly how I was going to orchestrate it. I made coffee in my quiet kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd planned every major decision of my adult life, from Robert's funeral arrangements to the acquisition of my first nursing facility. The sunrise painted everything golden, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Excitement. Not the nervous excitement of hope, but the steady thrill of having a plan that would work exactly as intended. My first call was to James Morrison, my attorney for the past 15 years. James was sharp, discreet, and completely loyal to my interests, rather than anyone else's ideas about what those interests should be. He'd helped me structure the business, navigate regulatory challenges, and build the legal framework that had made Edwards Healthcare Group one of the most respected chains in the Midwest. "Thelma," he said when his secretary put me through, "you're up early. What can I do for you?" "James, I need to discuss some personal matters that may have business implications. Can you fit me in today?" "Of course. Is everything all right?" I smiled, looking out at my garden where the early daffodils were beginning to emerge. Everything is about to be perfect. I'll see you at 10. The next call was to Dr. Harrison Webb, my personal physician, and a man I'd known since he was a resident doing rotations at one of my facilities 12 years ago. Harrison was thorough, ethical, and had no patience for family members who tried to override their elderly relatives' medical autonomy without cause. Dr. Webb's office, his receptionist answered. This is Thelma Edwards. I'd like to schedule a comprehensive physical and cognitive assessment as soon as possible. Full workup, every test available. Is there a particular concern, Mrs. Edwards? Just due diligence, I replied. I want everything documented properly. I can get you in this afternoon at 2:30. Perfect. By evening, I'd have both. Legal counsel and medical documentation. The foundation for everything that was about to unfold. My third call was to Margaret Sullivan, the director of admissions at Willowbrook Care Center. Willowbrook was my newest facility, opened just 18 months ago, and it was absolutely pristine. State-of-the-art equipment, a staff-to-resident ratio that exceeded industry standards, and waiting lists 6 months long because families fought to get their loved ones placed there. Margaret, this is Thelma Edwards. Mrs. Edwards, what a pleasant surprise. What can I do for you? I need to discuss a potential admission, but it's somewhat unusual circumstances. Are you free for lunch today? For you? Absolutely. Noon at the club? Perfect. And Margaret, this conversation needs to remain completely confidential until I tell you otherwise. Of course, Mrs. Edwards. I'll see you at noon. By 9 o'clock, I had my entire day planned and my strategy mapped out with military precision. I dressed carefully in my navy blue suit, the one that made me look like the successful businesswoman I was rather than the elderly burden my family apparently saw. I styled my silver hair in its elegant updo, applied makeup with a steady hand, and chose jewelry that spoke of prosperity and confidence. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see an old woman who needed to be managed. I saw the CEO of a healthcare empire, a woman who'd built something significant and lasting, someone who commanded respect in boardrooms and regulatory meetings across 3 states. It was time to remind everyone else of that fact. My meeting with James Morrison was everything I'd hoped it would be. His office in downtown Detroit was elegant and professional, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river and bookshelves lined with legal precedents that had shaped healthcare law for decades. Thelma, he said, rising from behind his high mahogany desk to greet me. You look wonderful. Retirement clearly agrees with you. I'm not retired, James. Semi-retired at most, and that's actually what I want to discuss with you. I settled into the leather chair across from his desk and opened my purse to retrieve the folder of brochures Patricia had sent me. I placed them on his desk with the same precision I'd once used to present acquisition proposals to investors. My daughter has decided that I need to be placed in residential care, I said without preamble. She's researched facilities, made preliminary inquiries, and presented me with what she considers to be my options. James picked up the brochures, flipping through them with the expression of a man who'd seen similar situations too many times. And how do you feel about her recommendations? I think Patricia has confused her convenience with my well-being, but more importantly, I think she's forgotten exactly what business I'm in and what that means for her assumptions about control. A slow smile spread across James's face. What do you have in mind? I want to be admitted to Willowbrook Care Center. Not because I need care, but because I want to experience firsthand how families are treated when they place their elderly relatives in institutional settings. I want to understand what it feels like to be on the receiving end of the system I've spent my career perfecting. That's certainly unusual, James said, leaning back in his chair. But not impossible. What safeguards do you want in place? Complete control over my care plan, visitor policies, and discharge decisions. I want Patricia listed as my emergency contact and primary family member, but I want all actual decision-making authority retained by me. If she wants me in professional care, She's going to learn what that really means. And the business implications? This was the part I'd been most excited to discuss. I want to structure my admission as a trial period for potential succession planning. If Patricia proves capable of managing family responsibilities with the same attention and dedication she expects from professional caregivers, then we'll discuss her increased involvement in the business. If she doesn't, then I'll be making alternative arrangements for both my care and my legacy. James was quiet for several minutes, making notes and considering the legal complexities. Finally, he looked up with the expression of a man who appreciated elegant solutions to complicated problems. "It's brilliant," he said. "Completely legal, ethically sound, and likely to be extremely educational for everyone involved. How long are you thinking for this experiment?" "As long as it takes for Patricia to either step up or reveal her true priorities. Weeks, months, however long the lesson requires. I'll draw up the documentation. When do you want to begin?" "Soon. Very soon." My lunch with Margaret Sullivan at the country club was equally productive. Margaret was in her late 40s, a former nurse who'd moved into administration because she understood both the clinical and business sides of senior care. She was also someone who'd seen enough family dynamics to appreciate the complexity of what I was proposing. "Mrs. Edwards," she said as we settled into a quiet corner table overlooking the golf course, "I have to admit I'm intrigued. In 30 years of healthcare, I've never had an owner want to experience their own facility as a resident." "Think of it as the ultimate quality assurance program," I replied, cutting into my salmon with surgical precision. "I want to know if we're actually providing the level of care and family support that we promise, or if we're just enabling families to abandon their responsibilities with a clear conscience." "And your daughter has no idea what you're planning?" "Patricia believes she's convinced me to consider residential placement for my own good. She has no idea that I'm about to give her exactly what she asked for, just not in the way she expected." Margaret laughed, a sound of genuine appreciation. "When do you want to be admitted?" "Next week. I want a private room with a view of the garden. And I want my care plan to include physical therapy, social activities, and regular family conferences. I want Patricia to experience every aspect of what it means to have a loved one in professional care. And if she objects, if she realizes what you're doing and tries to interfere, then she'll learn that patient autonomy is a fundamental right, not a family decision. I'm 73 years old, mentally competent and financially independent. If I want to live in a nursing home, that's my choice to make." "What about your house, your personal affairs?" "James is handling all of that. My house will be maintained, my bills will be paid, my business responsibilities will be managed. Nothing will change except my address and Patricia's level of required involvement in my daily well-being." Margaret shook her head in admiration. "Your daughter has no idea what she's walked into, does she? Patricia has spent her entire adult life taking my presence for granted while expecting my resources to be constantly available. She's about to learn the difference between having a mother who gives generously and having a mother who needs something in return." My medical appointment with Dr. Webb that afternoon was the final piece of the foundation. Harrison was thorough, professional, and completely supportive of my plan once I explained the circumstances. "Thelma, your cognitive function is excellent, your physical health is better than most people 20 years younger, and your decision-making capacity is completely intact," he said, reviewing the results of my comprehensive examination. "If you want to voluntarily admit yourself to a care facility, that's entirely within your rights. And if Patricia or David question my competency, they're welcome to request an independent evaluation, but any qualified physician will reach the same conclusions I have. You're a healthy, intelligent woman making an informed decision about your living arrangements." "Perfect. I'll need all of this documented in writing." "Already done. And Thelma, for what it's worth, I think your daughter is about to learn some very important lessons about family responsibility. By the time I returned home that evening, every piece was in place. Legal documentation ensuring my autonomy, medical records confirming my competency, and admission arrangements that would put Patricia exactly where I wanted her, in the position of having to provide the kind of attention and care she'd been avoiding for months. I spent the evening going through my house, selecting the personal items I'd want with me at Willowbrook. Photos of Robert, books I'd been meaning to reread, comfortable clothes that would be appropriate for facility living. I packed like someone, going on an extended vacation rather than someone being institutionalized, because that's exactly what this was. A carefully planned expedition into the heart of family dysfunction. The next morning I called Patricia. "Hi, Mom," she answered, and I could hear the wariness in her voice. She was probably expecting me to continue our argument about the senior living facilities. "Hello, sweetheart. I've been thinking about our conversation the other night, and I've made a decision." "Oh?" Hope crept into her voice, the hope of someone who thought they were about to get exactly what they wanted. "You were right about the safety concerns, about the isolation, about the benefits of professional care. I've decided to move into a residential facility." Silence. Then, "Really? Mom, that's wonderful. I know it wasn't an easy decision, but I think you're going to be so much happier with the security and social opportunities." Security and social opportunities, not because she wanted to spend more time with me, not because she'd realized how much she'd been neglecting me, but because professional strangers would handle the inconvenience of my needs. "I've already made arrangements," I continued. "I'll be moving to Willowbrook Care Center on Monday." "Willowbrook? I don't think that was one of the places we researched. Are you sure it's the right fit?" "I'm very sure. It's an excellent facility with outstanding staff and comprehensive services. I think you'll be impressed when you visit." When I visit. There it was. The first hint that Patricia hadn't really thought through what my being in a facility would mean for her level of involvement. She'd imagined dropping me off somewhere, safe, and then continuing her life as usual, with occasional check-ins to salve her conscience. Well, yes, dear. Facilities like Willowbrook have very structured family involvement expectations, regular visits, participation in care planning, family conferences with the staff. It's all designed to ensure that residents maintain strong family connections. Another pause. How regular is regular? Daily visits are encouraged, weekly family meetings are standard, and family members are expected to participate in social activities and mealtimes whenever possible. It's really quite comprehensive. I could practically hear her mind racing, trying to figure out how to maintain her busy lifestyle while meeting the kind of expectations I was describing. "Mom, that sounds like a lot of time commitment. Are you sure there aren't facilities with more flexible family policies?" Flexible family policies. She wanted me safely contained but didn't want to actually have to show up and participate in my care. "Oh no, sweetheart. Willowbrook is very focused on family involvement. They believe that residents thrive when their loved ones are actively engaged in their daily lives. I'm so looking forward to seeing more of you and Michael." "And Michael?" "Of course. Intergenerational programs are a big part of their approach. Michael will love the activities they have planned for grandchildren. Art projects, gardening, game tournaments. It's going to be such a wonderful opportunity for us to spend quality time together." I could hear her breathing, could imagine her trying to figure out how to object without sounding like an uncaring daughter. "That sounds intensive," she finally said. "It is, but isn't that what you wanted? For me to have comprehensive care and strong family support? Willowbrook provides both." "I just thought, we assumed that professional care would mean less pressure on the family, not more." And there it was, the truth she'd been trying to avoid saying directly. She didn't want me to have better care. She wanted me to be someone else's responsibility. "Oh no, dear. Quality care requires family partnership. The best facilities don't replace family involvement, they enhance it. You're going to learn so much about proper elder care. Learn? Well, yes. As my primary family contact, you'll be working closely with my care team to ensure all my needs are met. Physical therapy appointments, social activities, medical consultations, meal planning, medication management. It's really quite involved. The silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. Mom, she finally said, maybe we should talk about this more. Maybe there are other options we haven't considered. Other options? Like what? Like maybe you don't need residential care after all. Maybe we could arrange for some help at your house instead. A housekeeper, a companion, someone to check on you. Now she was trying to backtrack, trying to avoid the consequences of her own suggestions. But it was too late. She'd shown me exactly how she saw our relationship, and I was going to give her exactly what she'd asked for. Patricia, you made very compelling arguments about the dangers of living alone, about the benefits of professional oversight, about the peace of mind that comes from knowing I'm properly cared for. I'm just following your advice. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was overreacting to the fall, being too cautious. No, sweetheart, you were absolutely right. And Willowbrook is going to provide everything you said I needed. Professional care, social opportunities, safety monitoring, and meaningful family involvement. I'm so grateful that you helped me see how important this decision was. I could hear her trapped in her own logic, unable to argue against the very points she'd made so convincingly just days earlier. When did you say you're moving in? Monday? Morning. The intake process begins at 9. I'll need you there to help with the paperwork and meet with my care team. This Monday? As in 3 days from now? Yes. I didn't want to delay once I'd made the decision. You were so concerned about my safety, and I didn't want you worrying unnecessarily. Mom, I don't know if I can get time off work on such short notice. Oh, but you'll have to, dear. Willowbrook requires family presence for admission procedures. It's part of their commitment to family-centered care. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, and I could imagine her frantically trying to rearrange her schedule, cancel appointments, figure out how to explain to her boss that she needed emergency time off to admit her mother to a nursing home. What about Michael's school? He can come after school. In fact, Willowbrook encourages children to be part of the admission process. It helps them adjust to their grandparents' new living situation. Adjust to. Mom, exactly how often are we expected to visit? Daily visits are strongly recommended for the first month, then 3 to 4 times a week after that. Weekend family activities are essentially mandatory. It's all about maintaining family bonds while ensuring professional care. I was making this up as I went along, but it all sounded perfectly reasonable for a high-quality facility that actually cared about resident well-being, rather than just warehousing elderly people. Mom, this is sounding like more of a time commitment than having you live at home was. Well, yes. Quality care requires quality family involvement. You can't just drop someone off and forget about them, Patricia. That wouldn't be love. That would be abandonment. The word hung in the air between us, sharp and unavoidable. I would never abandon you, she said quietly. Of course not, sweetheart. That's why you're going to be so wonderful at this. I have complete faith in your ability to provide the kind of family support that Willowbrook expects. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and smiled. Patricia had wanted me managed by professionals so she could go on with her life uninterrupted. Instead, she was about to discover that proper professional care required more family involvement, not less. She was about to learn that loving someone means showing up, paying attention, participating in their daily life, and making their well-being a priority rather than an afterthought. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparations. I arranged for my housekeeper to maintain the house in my absence, set up automatic bill payments, and briefed my business managers on handling day-to-day operations without my direct oversight. I packed my belongings like someone going on an important business trip, because in many ways, that's exactly what this was. Most importantly, I called Elena Chen. Elena, this is Thelma Edwards. I wonder if I could ask you for a favor. Of course, Thelma. What do you need? I'm going to be staying at Willowbrook Care Center for a while, and I was hoping you might visit occasionally. I think it would be interesting for you to observe how different families handle their elderly relatives in professional care settings. Are you all right? Is there something wrong? I'm fine. This is more of an educational experience. I think you might find it enlightening to see how Patricia and I navigate this new arrangement. Elena was quiet for a moment, then said, Thelma, are you conducting some kind of experiment? Let's just say I'm about to provide my family with a very comprehensive education in the difference between loving someone and managing them. She laughed, a sound of pure delight. You're going to teach them what it actually means to care for an elderly parent, aren't you? Something like that. Will you visit? I wouldn't miss it for the world. Sunday evening, I took one last walk through my house, saying goodbye to 40 years of memories and preparing for whatever revelations the next few weeks would bring. Tomorrow, Patricia would learn what it really meant to have a parent in professional care. She'd discover that love required action, that family bonds needed tending, that caring for someone was work that couldn't be delegated to strangers. She'd asked for me to be professionally managed. She was about to find out exactly what that meant, and exactly what it would cost her in time, attention, and emotional investment. The woman who'd spent her life taking my presence for granted was about to learn what my absence actually meant. And the daughter who'd wanted to solve the problem of me was about to discover that she'd just created a much bigger problem for herself. But most importantly, Thelma Edwards was about to reclaim her power, her dignity, and her right to be loved properly rather than simply tolerated conveniently. The education of Patricia Chen was about to begin. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes important decisions feel inevitable. I woke at 6, had my usual breakfast of coffee and toast with honey, and dressed in comfortable, but elegant clothes suitable for my new temporary residence. By 8:30, I was sitting in my living room with my suitcase by the door, waiting for Patricia to arrive and escort me into the next phase of our relationship. She knocked at exactly 8:45, which told me she'd been sitting in my driveway for several minutes, probably working up the courage to face what she'd set in motion. When I opened the door, she looked pale and anxious, wearing a business suit that suggested she was treating this like a professional obligation, rather than a family milestone. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice artificially bright. "Are you ready for this?" "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," I replied, and I meant every word. The drive to Willowbrook was mostly silent. Patricia kept glancing at me as if expecting me to change my mind, to admit this was all a mistake, to beg her to take me home instead. But I sat calmly in the passenger seat, watching the familiar streets of the city I'd lived in for 40 years, feeling more confident and purposeful than I had in months. "Mom," Patricia finally said as we turned into the Willowbrook parking lot, "you know you can change your mind about this, right? Even after we get inside, if you decide this isn't what you want, we can leave." Why would I change my mind? This is exactly what you recommended. Professional care, safety monitoring, social opportunities. Everything you said I needed. She couldn't argue with that logic, though I could see in her expression that she was beginning to understand the full implications of what professional care actually entailed. Willowbrook Care Center was beautiful, and I felt a surge of pride as we walked through the main entrance. The lobby was spacious and elegant, with comfortable seating areas, fresh flowers, and the kind of peaceful atmosphere that made families feel good about their decisions. Classical music played softly in the background, and the morning light, streaming through tall windows, created exactly the impression of dignity and serenity that I'd intended when I'd designed the space. Margaret Sullivan met us at the reception desk, looking professional and welcoming in her navy blue suit. She smiled warmly at both of us, though I caught the barely perceptible wink she gave me when Patricia wasn't looking. "Mrs. Edwards, welcome to Willowbrook, and you must be Patricia. I'm Margaret Sullivan, our Director of Family Services." "Director of Family Services?" Patricia repeated, and I could hear the concern in her voice. "Yes, we have an entire department dedicated to helping families navigate the transition to residential care. We've found that successful placement depends heavily on family engagement and support." Margaret led us to her office, which was decorated with photos of residents participating in various activities with their family members. Patricia studied them as we sat down, and I could see her processing the images of adult children feeding elderly parents, grandchildren visiting for birthday, parties, families gathered around dinner tables. "Let's begin with the family assessment," Margaret said, opening a thick folder. "This helps us understand the family dynamics and support systems that will be crucial to Mrs. Edwards' adjustment and well-being." "Family assessment?" Patricia asked. "Oh yes, it's one of our most important intake procedures. We need to understand each family member's role, availability, and commitment level. Research shows that residents with strong family involvement have significantly better health outcomes and quality of life." Margaret began asking questions that I knew would make Patricia increasingly uncomfortable. How often did she currently visit me? What activities did we do together? How involved was she in my medical care, my social life, my daily routines? With each question, Patricia's answers became shorter and more defensive. "And what about Michael?" Margaret asked. "How close is he to his grandmother?" "He loves her very much," Patricia said quickly. "Excellent. Children are such an important part of our intergenerational programming. We'll want him here for at least 2 afternoons a week for the first month, then weekly after that. It really helps residents maintain their sense of family connection." 2 afternoons a week? Patricia's voice was rising slightly. "He has school, baseball practice, homework." "Of course. We work around children's schedules. That's why we have evening and weekend programs as well. Family involvement is really non-negotiable for optimal resident outcomes." I watched Patricia's face as the reality of what she'd committed to began to sink in. She'd thought placing me in professional care would reduce her obligations, not multiply them. "Now, let's discuss the family care plan," Margaret continued, producing another set of forms. "Patricia, as the primary family contact, you'll be responsible for weekly care conferences with our staff, participation in therapy sessions, assistance with social activities, and regular family meals here at the facility." "Regular family meals?" "We strongly encourage families to eat with their loved ones at least twice a week. It maintains family bonds and helps residents feel valued and connected. We have a beautiful family dining room specifically for this purpose." Margaret was laying it on thick, but everything she was saying was actually standard practice at the highest quality facilities. Patricia just hadn't bothered to research what quality elder care actually looked like because she'd been focused on convenience rather than excellence. "What if I can't make it twice a week?" Patricia asked. "I have work, family responsibilities." "We understand that schedules can be challenging," Margaret said with practiced sympathy. "That's why we require family members to submit weekly schedules in advance so we can plan accordingly. If you can't be here, we need to know who will be substituting. A spouse, other family member, close friend. Residents can't be left without family contact for more than 3 days at a time." Patricia was staring at Margaret as if she were speaking a foreign language. 3 days? What happens if there's an emergency or I'm traveling for work? Then we'd need to discuss alternative arrangements. Perhaps Michael could increase his visits, or your husband could take over temporarily. The important thing is maintaining consistent family presence. I could see Patricia's mind racing, trying to figure out how to manage a social calendar that had never included regular visits to see me, let alone twice-weekly dinners and therapeutic session participation. Now, Margaret said, turning to me, Mrs. Edwards, let's discuss your preferences for family involvement. What kind of schedule would you like Patricia and Michael to maintain? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The opportunity to articulate exactly what I'd been missing, what I'd been hoping for, what loving families actually provided for their elderly members. I'd love to see Patricia every other day, if possible, I said, my voice warm but firm. And Michael at least twice a week. I've missed being part of their daily lives, hearing about school and work, sharing meals together. I'm really looking forward to having that kind of closeness again. Patricia's face had gone completely white. Every other day? Well, dear, you were so concerned about my isolation, about my safety, about making sure I had proper social interaction. This way, you'll be able to monitor my well-being firsthand, participate in my care decisions, and ensure I'm getting everything I need. But I thought, isn't that what the professional staff is for? Margaret stepped in smoothly. Our staff provides excellent clinical care, but emotional and social well-being requires family involvement. We can't replace family love and attention. We can only supplement it. What about visiting hours? Patricia asked desperately. Surely there are restrictions on when families can be here. Oh, no, Margaret replied cheerfully. We encourage families to visit whenever it's convenient. Early morning, late evening, weekends, holidays. The more integrated residents are with their families' daily lives, the better they adjust to residential living. I watched Patricia processing this information, realizing that instead of reducing her involvement in my life, placing me at Willowbrook was going to dramatically increase it. She'd wanted me professionally managed so she could go on with her life uninterrupted. Instead, she was discovering that professional management required her active participation. Let's take a tour of the facility, Margaret suggested, so you can see where Mrs. Edwards will be living and get familiar with our programs. The tour was masterful. Margaret showed us everything, explaining how each area was designed to facilitate family interaction. The family dining room where Patricia would be expected to share meals with me. The activity center where she'd participate in craft projects and game tournaments. The garden where we'd take walks together. The family conference room where she'd meet weekly with my care team to discuss my progress and needs. With each stop, Patricia looked more overwhelmed and I felt more vindicated. This was what loving families did for their elderly members. This was what I'd been hoping for, asking for, desperately needing. And now, instead of being able to ignore my needs while feeling good about providing professional care, Patricia was going to have to actually show up and be present in my life. My room was lovely, spacious, and bright with a view of the garden I'd specifically requested. Margaret explained that I'd be able to decorate it with personal items, that Patricia was welcome to help me arrange my belongings, that families often spent time here just talking and relaxing together. When can I bring my things? I asked. Anytime today. In fact, we encourage family members to help residents settle in. It's an important bonding experience. Patricia looked like she wanted to cry. Today? I thought maybe we could do it gradually, over several days. Oh no, Margaret said firmly. Research shows that quick, complete transitions are less traumatic for residents. We recommend having everything moved in within 24 hours. I could see Patricia mentally canceling whatever plans she'd had for the rest of the day, possibly the rest of the week. She'd thought she could drop me off and return to her normal routine. Instead, she was learning that moving an elderly family member into care was an intensive, time-consuming process that required her full attention and participation. And when would you like to schedule your first family dinner? Margaret asked, consulting her calendar. Tomorrow evening would work well, or Wednesday if that's better for Michael's schedule. Tomorrow? Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. We've found that maintaining normal family routines helps residents adjust more quickly. The sooner you resume regular shared meals, the better Mrs. Edwards will feel about her new living situation. By the time we completed the intake process, Patricia looked shell-shocked. She'd signed forms committing to weekly care conferences, bi-weekly family dinners, regular participation in social activities, and immediate notification if she was going to miss any scheduled visits. She'd provided emergency contact information for David and Michael, scheduled times for them to meet with my care team, and agreed to attend a family orientation session the following weekend. "I think that covers everything for today," Margaret said, gathering the completed paperwork. "Patricia, we'll see you tomorrow evening at 6 for dinner and Thursday morning at 10 for your first care conference. Mrs. Edwards, welcome to Willowbrook. I know you're going to be very happy here." After Margaret left us alone in my new room, Patricia sat heavily in the chair by the window and stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "Mom," she said quietly, "what have you done?" "I've taken your advice, sweetheart. I've arranged for professional care in a safe, supportive environment with excellent family programming. This isn't what I meant, and you know it." "What did you mean, Patricia? Did you mean that you wanted me somewhere safe where you didn't have to think about me? Did you mean that you wanted other people to be responsible for my well-being, so you could go on with your life without the inconvenience of an aging mother?" She looked down at her hands, unable to meet my eyes, and I knew I'd hit the truth she'd been trying to avoid acknowledging. "I thought professional care would be easier," she admitted. "For both of us." "Easier for you," I corrected. "You thought you could solve the problem of me by putting me somewhere where other people would handle my needs while you continued to live as if I didn't exist. That's not true. Isn't it? When's the last time you called just to see how I was feeling? When's the last time you invited me to spend time with you that didn't involve me paying for something or providing something you needed? When's the last time you treated me like family instead of like a burden?" Patricia was crying now, quiet, tears that spoke of guilt and recognition, and the painful realization that she'd been caught in her own assumptions. "I love you, Mom. I know you do. But love isn't just a feeling, Patricia. It's a choice, an action, a commitment to showing up and being present in someone's life. You've been loving me in theory while neglecting me in practice. I didn't realize. I didn't think. You didn't think about what I needed because you were focused on what you wanted. You wanted me safe and managed so you could feel good about yourself without having to actually do the work of caring." She looked around the room, taking in the reality of where we were and what it meant. "So now what happens? Now you learn what it actually means to have a parent in residential care. You show up, you participate, you make my well-being a priority. You discover whether you're capable of loving me with actions instead of just words. And if I can't, if this is too much, if I can't manage all these expectations?" I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised and sacrificed for and loved unconditionally, and felt a calm certainty about what came next. "Then you'll have learned something important about yourself, and I'll have learned something important about our relationship, and we'll both make decisions based on that knowledge." Patricia stayed for another hour, helping me unpack my belongings and arrange my room. She was quiet, thoughtful, clearly processing the magnitude of what she'd committed to. When she finally left, promising to return the next evening for dinner, I sat in my new space and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The next few weeks were revelatory for everyone involved. Patricia, forced to visit every other day, began to actually see me as a person with thoughts, feelings, and experiences worth her attention. Our conversations, no longer rushed or distracted, deepened into the kind of connection I'd been hoping for. She learned about my childhood, my marriage to her father, the early struggles of building the business. I learned about her worries, her dreams, her challenges as a mother and wife. Michael, required to visit twice a week, discovered that spending time with his grandmother could actually be enjoyable. We worked on puzzles together, played chess, and talked about books and movies and his plans for the future. Gradually, he stopped seeing me as an obligation and started seeing me as an interesting person who happened to be related to him. David, initially resistant to the family involvement requirements, found himself drawn into the activities Margaret had planned. He helped me with a woodworking project in the craft room, joined us for family game nights, and even brought his golf clubs to practice on the putting green with Michael and me. Elena Chen visited regularly, as she'd promised, and I could see her observing the dynamics between my family and me with growing understanding. One afternoon, while Patricia was helping me tend the small garden plot I'd been assigned, Elena pulled me aside. "Thelma," she said quietly, "this is working, isn't it? Patricia is actually becoming the daughter you always hoped she'd be." "She's learning," I replied, watching Patricia carefully water the tomato plants we'd planted together. "She's discovering that caring for someone requires time and attention and presence, not just money and good intentions. And how long will you stay here?" "As long as it takes for the lesson to be complete." The turning point came in my 6th week at Willowbrook. Patricia had been visiting faithfully, participating in care conferences, sharing family dinners, gradually becoming more involved in my daily life than she'd been in years. We were in my room one evening, reading together in comfortable silence, when she suddenly looked up from her book. "Mom," she said, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "Sweetheart, for taking you for granted. For treating you like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved. For thinking that providing for you financially was the same as caring for you emotionally." I closed my book and gave her my full attention. "What made you realize that?" "Being here, spending this time with you, seeing what you actually needed all along." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I thought love meant making sure you had everything you needed, but you already had everything you needed except the one thing I wasn't giving you. My presence, my attention, my genuine interest in your life. And now? Now I understand that caring for someone means showing up, not just paying bills. It means being interested in their thoughts and feelings, not just their safety. It means making them a priority, not just an obligation." That night, after Patricia left, I called Margaret to my room. "I think it's time," I said simply. "Time for what, Mrs. Edwards?" "Time to go home. The lesson is complete." Margaret smiled. "I thought you might say that soon. Patricia has become a completely different daughter over the past 6 weeks. She's become the daughter she always was underneath, once she understood what was actually required of her." "And your business?" "Will continue to operate exactly as it always has, with the added benefit of having a family member who now understands what quality elder care actually looks like." The next morning, I asked Margaret to call a family meeting. Patricia, David, and Michael all arrived looking concerned, probably expecting some kind of medical emergency or care plan change. "What's wrong?" Patricia asked immediately. "Are you okay?" "I'm perfectly fine," I assured her. "In fact, I've never been better. But I've made a decision." "What kind of decision?" "I've decided to move back home." The room went completely silent. Patricia stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. "Home?" "But Mom, you've been doing so well here. You seem happy, settled. Your care team says you're thriving." "I am thriving. But not because of the professional care, Patricia. I'm thriving because for the first time in years, I feel like a valued member of my family rather than a burden you're managing." "I don't understand." "You wanted me in professional care because you thought it would be easier for you. But quality care, real care, loving care, requires family involvement. You've learned that over the past 6 weeks." Patricia was quiet, for a long moment, processing what I was saying. "This was all planned, wasn't it? You knew this would happen." "I knew that if you were forced to actually show up and participate in my life, you'd remember who we were to each other. I knew That if you had to prioritize my well-being, you'd discover that doing so wasn't a burden, but a privilege. So you don't actually need residential care? I never needed residential care. I needed a daughter who saw me as a person worth her time and attention. Now I have that. David spoke up for the first time. So what happens now? Now we continue what we've built here. Family dinners twice a week, regular visits, shared activities, genuine involvement in each other's lives. The only difference is that it will happen in my house instead of this facility. And if I go back to the way things were before? Patricia asked quietly. Then I'll know that this was just a performance for your own comfort, and I'll make different decisions about my future and my legacy. Your legacy? This was the moment I'd been building toward for 6 weeks, the final lesson that would ensure the changes in Patricia were permanent rather than temporary. Patricia, you've spent the past month and a half learning what it means to provide quality care for an elderly family member. You've seen firsthand how much work it requires, how much attention and dedication and love. You've also seen how rewarding it can be when done properly. Yes, Edwards Healthcare Group owns 47 facilities across 3 states. Every one of them is filled with elderly people whose families have made the same choice you wanted to make. Drop them off and walk away. But you've learned that's not actually care. That's abandonment with professional supervision. Patricia nodded, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. I've been considering succession planning for the business, thinking about who should take over when I'm no longer able to run it effectively. I'd always assumed it would be you, but I needed to know whether you understood what our business actually means, what we're actually providing. And now? Now I know that you understand. The difference between warehousing elderly people and actually caring for them. You understand that family involvement isn't optional in quality elder care, it's essential. You understand that our residents aren't just clients. They're people who deserve the same kind of attention and respect you've learned to give me. Patricia was crying again, but these were different tears. Tears of understanding, of gratitude, of recognition. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for treating you like an inconvenience, for taking you for granted, for not seeing what you needed from me. I know you are, sweetheart, and I know you won't make those mistakes again. I won't. I promise. The person I've become, over the past 6 weeks, the daughter I've learned to be, that's who I want to be from now on. Then let's go home. The transition back to my house was everything I'd hoped it would be. Patricia helped me move my belongings, but more importantly, she helped me plan how to maintain the connection we'd rebuilt. We scheduled regular family dinners, planned weekend activities, established routines that would keep us involved in each other's lives. Michael, who'd initially resisted the required visits to Willowbrook, asked if he could continue coming over twice a week, even though it was no longer mandatory. David suggested that he and Patricia could help me with home, maintenance and yard work, tasks that would give us time together while ensuring my house remained safe and comfortable. Most importantly, Patricia began taking a more active role in the business, not as someone being groomed to inherit it, but as someone who finally understood what it represented. She visited our facilities regularly, talked with residents and their families, implemented programs she'd learned about at Willowbrook. I never realized, she told me one evening as we reviewed reports from our newest facility, how much our work matters, how much difference we make in people's lives. And their families' lives, I added. Every resident we care for properly is someone's mother, father, spouse, sibling. When we provide genuine care, we're supporting entire families, not just individuals. Like you supported me by teaching me how to care for you properly. Exactly like that. 6 months later, Patricia was named Assistant Director of Family Services for Edwards Healthcare Group, a position that involved training families in proper elder care involvement and ensuring that our facilities maintained the highest standards of family-centered care. She was good at it because she'd learned firsthand what families needed and what residents deserved. Elena Chen remained a close friend, often joining our family dinners and marveling at the transformation she'd witnessed. "You know," she said, one evening as we watched Patricia and Michael working together on a puzzle I'd given them, "what you did was brilliant. You didn't just teach Patricia how to care for you, you taught her how to be a better person." "I taught her what she already knew but had forgotten," I replied. "That love is a verb, not just a feeling. That family means showing up, not just showing support. That caring for someone is a privilege, not a burden. And now? Now I have the daughter I always hoped for and the family I always wanted. And when the time comes that I actually do need residential care, I know they'll be there every step of the way, not because they have to be, but because they want to be." Patricia looked up from the puzzle and smiled at me, the kind of smile that comes from genuine affection rather than obligation. "Mom, are you ready for dinner? I brought the ingredients for your favorite soup." "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it. Ready for dinner, ready for family time, ready for a future where love was demonstrated through presence and care was measured in attention rather than money. The woman who'd built a healthcare empire to keep families together had finally succeeded in keeping her own family together, not through guilt or obligation, but through teaching them what love actually looked like in action. And the daughter who'd wanted to abandon her mother to professional care had learned that the most professional care of all was the kind that came from the heart of a family who'd remembered how to truly see each other. The irony was perfect. The lesson was complete, and the love was finally real. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.